This is Hot Science. I'm Richard Clarke. Every week I present and we discuss what I think are the week's top stories in science, technology, and medicine. Thank you for joining us. And this week, the top stories are uh, my top news story is one that is from the climate conference that's going on in Egypt. And the headline is "The World is Failing Its Emissions Test," though it's not a positive, hopeful story. In technology, the story is that automakers are going to double their spending on EVs and batteries, increasing it to $1.2 trillion by 2030. In the environment, there is a shocking amount of US recycling that goes straight to the landfill, 95%. And, you'd have to say with that, you'd have to ask if this whole recycling effort is just a waste of time. In materials, they now have the thinnest ferroelectric material that was ever developed, and it is going to pave the way to new tiny energy efficient devices. And in space, we have a story from a different country than we usually talk about in the space stories. And this is India's largest rocket, the GSLV Mark III, lifting off successfully. In biology, our story is petting a dog is good for your brain. In the human story is about Mexico's dying democracy. I think perhaps Norman will be able to make some comments on this story. This is a story of AMLO and the toll of his authoritarian populism. And then finally, in medical stories, there's a startup saying that it is honing in on a way to reverse aging. And of course, to sell this process to the highest bidder. So that's what we have for this week. And let me start with the top story. The world is failing its emissions test. Greenhouse gases need to halve by 2030, and they're still going up. And this is based on a new report from the UN, and it says the world is on track to increase emissions by 10% compared to 2010. And this is even if countries actually meet their current commitments, which most countries are behind on. And this could lead to global average temperature rise as high as 2.9 degrees C. 1.5 was the target. We're at 1.2 now, and we're seeing weather disasters every year as a result of the increase we have so far. The effects of these lack of action is already apparent. For example, UNICEF warned that already more than 500 million children around the world are facing frequent heat waves. And by 2050, this will affect nearly every child in the world as they have looked at different health damages of different weather problems. Heat damage is about the most damaging to human beings. And we're seeing that increasing significantly already. And the UN says these disasters are not inevitable or natural. They are of our own making. And these rising average temperatures also, according to other reports published in the Lancet, are increasing the spread of diseases, impairing food, and threatening the health system as a whole. And climate conferences like the COP27 that is currently going on are the main vehicle for coordinating between countries, but the process has been slow. It started with the 2015 Paris Agreement, where they set up a process. And it was clear, though, even from the outset, that what countries promised to do wouldn't be enough. And their uh, countries are not being aggressive enough to sign up to what is needed, and most countries are not meeting the commitments that they've made. So far, uh, what we have done has barely moved the needle. Global greenhouse emissions have still continued to rise. There is a little hope there. It looks like perhaps by 2025, in another 2 or 3 years, we may actually see their peak. And so, as leaders gather in this conference about climate change may not be their main thing that they're thinking about. Inflation is rising with the invasion in Ukraine. Fuel prices have spiked, so have grain prices. And countries right now, because of these problems, are increasing their use of coal, reversing years of design of decline, even though natural energy, renewable energy, is cheaper than ever. The bulk of the world's economy still runs on coal and natural gas. And climate change now is becoming impossible to ignore. The recent floods in Pakistan that killed more than 1,000 people are an example of it. Has been extreme heat, drought, and wildfire fires that affected almost 1 billion people in China, and giant heat waves in India are just a few examples of what we have seen. And right now, the small countries that are not contributing into the climate gases are starting to ask not just for urgency to address climate change, they're starting to ask for reparations. They say we have not, we have contributed to least to the global greenhouse gas emissions, and yet we're often the ones that suffer the most. Help us out here. The UN Secretary Antonio Guterres says, quote, it's high time to put fossil fuel producers, investors, and enablers on notice, he said at the UN General Assembly. Polluters must pay. Uh, Wealthy countries like the US are not acknowledging any liability, of course. They're saying we don't want to pay. And if you look at what's happening to the fuel producers, they presently are having the most profits that they have ever had, I believe. So they have no incentive to reduce their pumping. They're making money almost $1 billion a day in profits right now. The last quarter, they got $70 billion in profit. So anyway, the UN says, hey, we're not doing it. And it's going to get worse unless and until we find some positive ways to do something. What we need to do in the near term is to put in enough renewables where we can bend the curve and get to the point where we are not adding each year more greenhouse gases. The hopeful sign is maybe by 2025, we'll actually have enough renewables in place to do this. So that's what I got. What do you guys think?
On energy, there's a real issue. The energy return on investment. In other words, how much energy it costs. The renewables cost multitudes more than coal. And as energy demand is increasing, as a result, coal will be more and more important in generating electricity. Coal is even more energy efficient than hydro. And hydro is the most efficient of the renewables.
And about coal, I looked somewhere, I was curious about coal's contribution to the greenhouse gas problems. And a while back, I researched it, and I can't remember what the number was, but it's something like 70% of the greenhouse gases that we are presently fighting came from burning coal.
There's no question that use of coal is unfortunate, but as energy demand increases, coal will end up supplying the energy.
I hope not. You might be right, but I understand what you're saying. I remember that song, Trouble in River City. We got trouble. My friends, we got trouble. Okay, now on to a little bit of the solution side. And automakers are planning to spend about $1.2 trillion through 2030 to develop and produce millions of EVs, electric vehicles, along with the batteries and raw materials that are needed to support that production. And automakers have forecast plans to build 54 million electric battery vehicles in 2030. And this is equaling about half of the total vehicle production. And to do this, our production of batteries has to increase by more than a factor of 10 by now in 2030. And so this is an extraordinary rate of increase. And there has to be materials enough to be able to produce that degree of batteries. Now, there are changes in battery technologies that are coming, which may significantly reduce that number. If the fast charging schemes are widely adopted, then It could be that the number of batteries we need is only 5 times more than we make in the world now instead of 10 times more. So we'll see what happens there. But to support this unprecedented level of EVs, car makers and their battery partners are planning to install 5.8 terawatt hours of battery production a year by 2030. And that's almost an increase of 20 over our current world production level. And if leading the charge is Tesla, they think they're planning to build 20 million EVs out of the 54 million EVs in 2030. And they say they're going to require an estimated 3 terawatt hours of batteries. That's about half of the batteries needed in the world. And so they are madly working on battery technologies and car technologies, and their exponential growth is going to come at the cost of hundreds of billions of dollars of investment. Volkswagen has ambitious plans, and it's pledged $100 billion to build out its global EV and battery uh, portfolio with new battery gigafactories in Europe and North America. They're trying to lock up supplies. Toyota says it's going to invest 70 billion to electrify vehicles and produce more batteries, and expects to sell 3.5 million battery EVs in 2030. Notice Toyota's plan is 3.5 million, Tesla's is 20 million. Ford is investing 50 billion, and it's going to says it'll produce about 3 million EVs in 2030. Mercedes-Benz is investing about 50 billion, and Stellaris and General Motors are each investing about 35 billion. So there is a ton of money being spent through the car production facilities and battery production and materials facilities. The car companies see the future is coming. These different rules in different places, like Europe just passed a rule saying eliminate the sale of new gas cars by 2035. All of these things are making the automakers see that their future is electric, and they're all spending vast amounts of money to be able to stay in the game. And as always, we'll see what happens later. There are a bunch of new guys that most of us haven't heard of who in 10 years are going to be powerful worldwide companies.
But it's a terrible misfocus because a long haul truck emits 40 times the emissions of an automobile. 40 times. It's the long haul trucks and moving stuff by rail that really makes the most difference. Electric cars are driven an hour or 2 hours a day.
But there's so many
Long
of them.
haul trucks,
There's still so many of them that they're a big chunk of the automotive emissions. I guess altogether the automotive emissions are what, 10 or 20% of the total pollution. So are they
well, the long haul trucks
are a big
really
piece of it? Absolutely.
are a giant piece of it.
And they're easier. The fully automated things are a lot easier on these trucks with simple defined routes than they are for the normal household use. The biggest impact, I think, of EVs for this normal driving use will come when they are autonomous and you don't need to own a car. So,
I seem to recall just a couple of weeks ago that we talked about long haul EV trucks.
right.
So there's technology and work going on in that direction also.
And they're in production now, and there's going to be a lot more production happening this year. Tesla is going to release its version of the long haul truck, for example, and there are other companies not as well known who are already delivering them.
Right. Something that I'm just curious about, for the first article I've read, they called the electric vehicle, they're distinguishing it as a BEV, not just an EV.
A battery EV, as opposed to an HEV.
Well, that does open the door, like you say, for hydrogen,
Right.
to call them other things,
Right.
even
Well,
solar.
Again, as Norman was talking about trucks, Volvo, who makes most of its money selling trucks in Europe, has announced plans to massively convert its trucks line to hydrogen fuel cells. And though the article doesn't talk about it, there's still an immense struggle within Toyota, because Toyota has believed for years that the hydrogen fuel cell is going to end up winning. And because of that, they had not invested much in battery EVs. And there are giant struggles going on within Toyota about what their future is actually going to be. So it's not decided, just like you talked about, Chat. The BEV may not be the winner.
When we talk about electric aircraft, where the weight is quite important, hydrogen fuel cells powering the electric airplanes may dominate rather than heavy batteries.
Now, I thought that they were also investigating the use of hydrogen as fuel instead of gas for airplanes.
Yes, you can use hydrogen in engines, but the electric airplanes have much lower maintenance.
That's a good point. Right.
Turbine aircraft.
Right. That's one of the reasons why these guys in their flight trainer aircraft love the electric aircraft, because not only are the fuel costs lower, but the maintenance costs are dramatically lower. And, if you own one of those planes, you think that's all money.
And airplanes don't have to refuel every 100 miles along interstate highways or whatever.
Right, but they still have their limits. And the bigger the gas, the less the freight or passengers. So they have the trade-off between, power density, power weight, and their ability to carry a paying load. So it's still, it's a fascinating period that we're going through. And in another 10 years, we will know how all of this turned out.
Maybe.
And, like we're talking about, nobody actually knows. And even though these auto companies don't always know, we hear they're spending $1.2 trillion betting on a particular future. That's not a little bet.
No, but whether the EVs are hydrogen fuel cell powered or battery powered, the vehicles are much the same.
Right. That's right. The fuel cell just replaces the battery. And I think there are differences in the physical components, because the batteries are nice because you can make them flat, and there also are battery technologies that you can make into structural elements of the cars, like in the door frames and stuff like this. That's something they haven't been doing yet, but that's a thing that we'll see as it goes along.
They're starting to do that with the airplane that uses solar or uses batteries, make them part of the structure.
Oh,
Part of
yes,
the wings
absolutely.
or-
They can't
Yeah.
afford the extra weight. I think they made
Right.
them a part of the fuselage, but I don't know. I've heard the same thing you were talking about, but I haven't investigated further. Anyway, so things are changing, and tune in a while and we will know what happened. Those of us who are still alive, who are taking the special life enhancers that we'll talk about later, then you'll know. Okay, so then a report that comes out from Greenpeace USA. You know, they are not big fans of pollution. And this is their report on plastic. And they say only 5% of plastic waste in the US actually gets recycled. And the vast majority of the waste ends up in the waste stream somehow, mostly in landfills. And this has really increased in the last few years because in 2018, China stopped importing plastic waste, and this has caused a backup. But even before all of this, the numbers I read said 9% of the plastic was recycled. Now it's 5%. And the US has failed to get its act together. The average American generates 300 pounds of plastic waste per person per year. That's 300 pound a day almost of plastic waste. And after more than 30 years, maybe it is time to start thinking that plastic recycling is a failed concept. The circular plastic economy still remains a fiction. Part of the problem is that plastic waste remains difficult to collect. It's often mixed, making it basically unusable unless you sort it. And so far, there are no efficient, cheap ways to sort it. And the recycling.
Richard, your volume is way down. It's hard to hear you.
Okay. And
It's better.
okay, I don't know. I'll just move my mic. Is that less bad?
Yeah, this is better.
Okay, I'll see what I can do. Excuse me, that didn't do it.
I have one adjustment I can make, and so let me make,
Don't overcorrect, okay?
We can always turn the
Don't-
volume down.
okay, this is as much as I can do. And I
Please turn
hope,
it down.
turn it down,
Yes,
okay.
for me
We
anyway.
do,
For me too. You sound like you're in a hollow. tube.
okay, how about now?
Yeah,
How about now?
Better.
How about
Good.
you, Norman? Okay, then we'll do that. Okay. Anyway, so as I was going on, plastic waste is difficult to collect. It's mixed. It's impossible to sort. The recycling is expensive and environmentally harming, and the recycling plastics can still be contaminated by impurities and not usable. And Also, non-recycled plastic production is rising at significant rates. The oil companies, which is the source of plastic, have been investing massively in plastic production and more than doubled it in the last few years. You know, they have to have some place that they can go to sell all the oil they want to pump. And it turns out much of this plastic could be recycling, such as PET and HDPE, numbered as number 1 and 2. And even in those which have a good process, only 20% of the PTE of the PET and 10% of the HDPE are recycled. And on numbers 3 through 7, less than 5% is recycled. And, you know, of course, industry groups and the big corporations have been pushing for recycling as a solution since the days of Lady Bird Johnson, since the 60s, really, or 70s. And by doing this and trying to put the recycling problem onto the consumer, they have shirked their own responsibility for making sure that recycling actually works. And now Greenpeace is calling for the UN to push for a refill and reuse strategy like the milkman used to use, like Coca-Cola used to use for the glass bottles. And what they're trying to do is to put this into the coming UN Global Plastics Treaty, which is aimed at tackling the plastic pollution crisis by 2024. And what they're saying is, instead of continuing to greenwash and mislead the public, industry should support an ambitious global plastics treaty that will finally end the age of plastics. That is the story. My editorial opinion is still that this recycling fiasco was started by the bottling companies like Coke, so they wouldn't have to collect the empties. And to get these companies to start collecting their own waste and figuring out how to recycling it is going to be a big push, even though it might be the best solution of the ones that are available to us now. So what do you guys think?
Well, this was certainly disappointing, to say the least. I thought we were all doing much better worldwide anyway.
Me too. I remember when I was in San Jose 20 years ago, and we had to start separating our garbage into a bunch of different classes and put it in different containers so the garbage collectors could collect it in the right place. And so there's this enormous use of energy and effort and goodwill that has been passed to the people. And I know people have adopted it as a way of living. And to hear that even with that, it's not making much of an impact is deeply disappointing. And I can see why people like Greenpeace think we've been hoodwinked by the bottling companies.
And you know, I remember back when China said, we're not going to take your dirty garbage anymore. And so that's what's caused, that was, I don't know, 20 years ago maybe, but that's what's caused now the backup of all the recyclables that are not being able to recycle. I liked the way we had a process in Washington State. That was you put trash in one barrel and recyclable in another barrel. And the recyclable was big. I mean, a lot of stuff went in there, and
Right.
and then I went to the recycling plant, and they recycle it. They made it.
They
Well,
did something,
find
but
out later. They weren't doing all that we thought they were doing. But even now we rinse out bottles and cans and stuff, and Southern California has a big drought problem. I mean, we're using a lot of water, believe it or not, but I spend about $200 a month for water in
Oh my
California,
God.
and it's going to go up. It's going up.
and
So
you're using
so
it to wash out bottles that were
that are
not
not
recycled to begin
being
with.
recycled anyway. I know.
Okay. So anyway, I think that's why Greenpeace may be saying that this whole thing is a failure. The one hopeful thing I heard about a year ago was of an AI plus a specialized camera that was able to identify the different kind of plastics, so it could be used potentially in a inexpensive computerized plastic sorter. But I haven't heard of any release of this technology into a high volume application. What I thought a long time ago when I was with my father decades ago, and he was saying that the solution to pollution is dilution. That's one of the early viewpoints about the environmental problem. And I knew then about some of the problems with dealing with trash and how much of the effort is required to sort trash out into its different reusable components. I was thinking at that time that what we ought to do is deliver all the trash to the prisons and have the prisoners sort out the trash as a payment for their crimes against society. And I thought that after spending a year sorting trash from people's kitchens, they wouldn't want to be back in prison again. But this is like a lot of big ideas that I had. It went nowhere.
There are some people that are trying to go to zero trash in their
Yes.
households,
Yes,
so they don't have any trash.
I've known a few.
I don't know how they do that, but that sounds like what we need to get to is recycle everything at home.
Right.
Of course, it requires burning stuff, and you put stuff into the air and whatever. But composting is a big thing for that.
Mm-hmm. Again, I knew people who are like that, and they might end up having, kind of one bag full of trash from their household that they couldn't deal with a year, that they had to still throw away. And for them, that was a defeat. Okay, moving on to materials. And this time I have a story about thin materials, but it's not graphene. And, as electronic devices become smaller and smaller, the materials that are used to power them become thinner and thinner. And this creates challenges in developing the next generation materials for electronics, discovering materials that can maintain their electronic properties at an ultra thin size. When things get thin, they start acting different as quantum effects start to overwhelm the normal electronic effects. And so one of the areas they've been looking at for these advanced materials is called ferroelectronics. And ferroelectronics is like classical magnetic electronics, but these are materials in which some of the atoms are arranged off-center, and it leads to a spontaneous internal electric charge or polarization. And in ferromagnetics, this internal polarization can reverse its direction if you hit it with an external voltage. And this offers great promise for low power switch devices. And something that can have one state or another is the basic element in an electronic switch. And so as they pursued this ferroelectronic path, the materials that they've known about it that can do this lose their ability to polarize when the material gets real thin. And so this means it's not ferroelectric anymore. And this has prevented the integration of desirable ferroelectronics into microelectronics. But now a team of researchers from University of California at Berkeley has created the thinnest ferroelectric material ever reported, and with it made the thinnest demonstration of a working memory on silicon that they've ever been able to do. And what they did along the way is they discovered stable ferroelectric properties in an ultra thin layer of zirconium dioxide. It's just half a nanometer thick, about 200,000 times thinner than a human hair. And they grew this directly on silicon, and at this thinness, the ferroelectricity emerges in the zirconium dioxide. And it's kind of interesting because in a thicker state, this material is not a ferroelectric material, but it exhibits these properties when it gets real thin. And they were able to this then to apply a small voltage and demonstrate the thinnest working memory ever reported in silicon. And this has substantial promise for energy efficient and small electronics. One of the things that helps is this zirconium dioxide material is already used in semiconductor processing. So they would use a material that they already know how to use, just with a different processing step to make it ferroelectric. And this is actually a key step towards integrating ferroelectronics into microelectronic circuits and enabling the next generation of tiny devices that can operate on low power. And the other thing about this discovery is it has implications for new two-dimensional materials. Right now, they're basically squeezing 2D materials, 3D materials into 2D thicknesses using semiconductor technology, depositing this material on semiconductors using technology they know how to use. And they think that this is going to open the door to a bunch of new 2D materials beyond graphene. And so this way of developing 2D materials is going to be a kind of a vital process in the future of microelectronics and since they don't know yet what they'll discover working with additional materials, who knows what implications it'll have.
Anything to reduce the energy consumption of the data centers really is of import. Data
Right,
centers require a tremendous amount of power,
right,
which is why data centers are often co-located with energy sources.
yes.
Like in Washington, I think the John Day Dam or something, Google
yes,
has a big data center adjacent to hydro.
Yes. And now, industrial uses of electronics produce about 10% of the CO2 on the planet. The last number I saw for the world data center power consumption was something on the order of 7% of the world's power is used to power the computers in these data centers. And of course, that number is increasing significantly every year. So having a technology where you can do the same job for a lot less power is actually a vital thing. Okay. So the next story is a space story about an unusual partner or country, rather, India. And the picture on screen is India's heaviest rocket, the 630-ton geosynchronous satellite launch vehicle, Mark III. So India's been working on it for a while, and they launched that recently. And the expendable rocket had a 5-minute flight and injected its cupcake-shaped 3-ton crew module at an altitude of 126 kilometers. This mission had two purposes. One was to test this twin engine power source, powering a 4-ton back load. And the second was to test the re-entry of its landing, its crew module pod. And this crew module pod is pretty big. It's the size of a small bedroom and can accommodate 2 or 3 people. And on this flight, the crew module re-enters the Earth's atmosphere, and the outer temperature gets to about 1600 degrees centigrade. So they need special stuff for it. And at an altitude of about 15 kilometers, the parachutes deploy for a soft landing into the water, and a naval ship picks it up. And so here is India getting into the launch business. And what I suspect is that because of India's present labor costs and low cost of engineering, that they will be a very price competitive launch source once they get this thing ironed out. And so you'll start to see India winning competitive battles against people like SpaceX, because the Indians can do it cheaper, even though their thing is not reusable yet. They'll figure out how to do that too, I suspect. So it's a sign of India's rising place in the world's technical countries. And so we'll see when India starts winning commercial launches from SpaceX and places like that. I think the launch business is really getting interesting because now there are many different countries and many of the US independent companies that are working on different projects. And so I think the space business is here to stay, and it's attractive enough where it's drawing competitors from all over the world. Okay, so now for the biology story, it turns out petting a dog is good for your brain. Dog owners already know that petting a dog is one of the best things ever, and science has already found that petting a dog can lower your stress and release the feel-good hormone oxytocin. But now scientists in Switzerland, in a new study, say that when you pet your dog, you get a boost in brain activity in the frontal cortex, which is a crucial part of the brain that controls attention, working memory, problem solving, thinking, and emotional reactions. So it's one of the things that makes humans particularly human. And petting a dog then makes your brain work better. And the study just goes to show how great therapy animals actually are, because they can boost the cognition and emotional activities of the brain. And this is needed in a lot of therapeutic situations. And so what they say is patients with deficiencies in motivation, attention, or socio-emotional functioning show higher emotional activities in activities connected to a dog. And that means these activities could increase their chance of learning and achieving therapeutic goals. What I wonder is if these dogs are so good in a therapeutic situation, then I don't know, they do us all some good, and maybe we all need some dog therapy. Anyway, what do you guys think? No
Well,
dog?
I'm wondering about, could it work with other animals than dogs? I mean, I don't particularly like dogs, but I like a cat. So would it work with a cat?
Maybe. They didn't test the cats.
Well, I think they need to get on it before, I don't want to be
Okay.
a dog parent.
Okay.
I don't want to be a dog parent for the rest of my life.
Well, maybe they should test on white rats too, so you could just keep a
And-
white rat in your pocket. And
Right?
pet,
Just pet them once in a while.
and that's right. Then you could use it with college students, so the college students could have the white rat in their pocket when they took their final.
Right. There's all kinds of ways to test this.
Well, and it seems to me that would be a good way to do one of these scientific tests, have a group of college students with the white rat in their pocket taking the final, and then have another group without the white rat in their pocket, and see which group got the better results in the test. And college students that must be used to having weird scientific tests done on them anyway.
They'll volunteer for anything
Okay, that's right.
with
Anyway,
a little bit of money.
that's right. Anyway, I think you have a good idea, Chad. They ought to be able to do that test with cats too. So,
And a few others.
right. Right. I had a kid who once had a snake. I don't know if they want to test those too. Petting a snake is not like petting a dog, though.
You're not kidding.
Okay,
You're not a snake lover, apparently.
that's right. Okay, now we have the story for Norman today. This is listen up closely, Norman. And AMLO took office 4 years ago and promised to deliver a fourth transformation, the next in a series of defining junctures in Mexican history. The first was the War of Independence in the early 1800s. The next was the liberal movement of Juarez later in the century. And the third was the Revolution of 1910. And AMLO said he's going to make Mexico great again. And in the name of,
Sounds familiar.
that's right, in the name of
Another-
his agenda, AMLO has removed checks and balances. He's weakened autonomous institution and seized discretionary control over the budgeting, arguing that like police forces can't stop the country's mounting insecurities. And so he's replaced them with the Mexican military and given it unprecedented economic and political cover. And with a lot of things, he has been restoring something that is like the one party rule that was characterized by India from Mexico from 1929 to 2000 by the PRI, but it's with a militarized twist. And despite all of these moves that are questionable, the president and his party, Moreno, remains popular. One of the things that I came to understand through reading this article is that Mexico, after the PRI, has tried to establish democratizing elements in their government and political system to spread the power from just the one group, and that AMLO particularly does not trust any of these political institutions. And so he is trying to, with his popularity, reinstate one party, one man rule in the country. And as he's doing this, the many people, including scholars and activists and opposition parties and members of civil society who fought to dismantle the hegemony of the PRI are all questioning what AMLO is doing. And they say he is polarizing the population and jeopardizing the fragile democracy that had started in Mexico in the previous 30 years, and saying his playbook is like the playbook of strong men in other countries. So, and they also note that he has reshaped the Mexican political ecosystem so quickly that defending democracy has become difficult in it. One big example of what he has done is he said when he was going into office that he was going to reduce the power of the military and promised to return the armed forces to the barracks. But what he's done after he came into power was exactly the opposite. And instead of reining in Mexico's army, AMLO has unleashed it. And so the article I have has many other examples of things that AMLO is doing, that where he is eliminating controls and institutions that it set up before. And as I say, I see from this article that he is doing this stuff because fundamentally he does not believe in these democratic institutions that spread power out. And he is trying, he says, to eliminate them because he thinks they're corrupt and inefficient. But he is basically replacing them with plutocrats and refusing to carry out financial reforms that tax the same plutocrats. So this article says that AMLO is a substantial threat to Mexico's democracy that was trying to emerge. It doesn't propose a solution to it. It just points out the threat. So what do you guys think? What do you think, particularly Norman? Because I know you've been paying more attention to this than most of the people here.
AMLO's favorite word in a conference with experts is cállate, shut up. He
Okay,
doesn't want to listen to experts. The level of poverty in Mexico has increased dramatically.
yes,
Everything that he's done has been an absolute disaster and put the hands of power in the Morena party, because he
okay,
has both the House and the Senate control, and he just has no patience, even with the universally acclaimed Institute of Elections, INE,
right,
has been free of corruption and conducted amazingly fair elections. And what's his answer to that? He wants to dissolve INE. He is an authoritarian, and his results, you might hope an authoritarian could produce good results, but the murder rate has shot up
right.
with the military rather than the police controlling the country.
Right, and one of the things I read in the article that I didn't read is access to health care in Mexico is now the lowest that it's been in 20 years. And though he has done things that he has talked big about expanding health care to the poor, the truth is that there is less access to health care now than there has been in the lifetime of many of the people.
Another disaster, healthcare. Yeah, he was going to unify all healthcare,
Right,
and the federal government was going to deal with it more efficiently.
right.
And as a result, even poor Mexicans have to pay for medical care now
Right.
outside of the government provided system.
So is there any solution? Oh, I'm sorry. What were you saying, Chad?
I'm a political scientist by education, and I am you can't get further left than me. But and I was anti-Trump from the beginning. But after Trump was elected, I started to think about, how did this happen? How did this happen to America, to the United States, I should say? Well, I've come to the conclusion that it's a worldwide phenomenon that's taking place: authoritarian populism. These people, Trump included, are being elected by the people. It's democracy at work. It may not result in what they want, but AMLO is still popular. The people like him. People want an authoritarian leader now for some reason.
Well, I think the reason is the world is changing, and so there is a big group of people that don't want to lose what they have. And I think, at one level, that's a respectable idea. The problem is that in these times of changes that we're going through, what you need is exactly the opposite, which is leaders who are open to new ideas.
And enlarge the middle class.
Yep.
But I'm toying now with the idea that perhaps democracy isn't working anymore, that it's run its course, and we're moving on to something else. And it's not what I want, but it may be that that's where we're headed.
Yeah, surely with Bolsonaro in Brazil, Erdogan in Turkey, Orban in Hungary, Xi in China,
Yeah.
Putin in Russia. We're seeing a rebirth of authoritarianism. And like AMLO, what are the first things you attack? The journalists,
Right.
the judiciary.
But at least it's
Intellectuals.
encouraging that Bolsonaro lost in Brazil, even though it was a real narrow victory. And we'll still see what happens in America next week. My instinct has said for months that it's still going to turn out to be bluer than most of the critics think. And we will see next week how full of shit I am. And
I noticed that I can't pronounce his name, but the person from Brazil that lost, he hasn't conceded the election.
oh, I know he's still going
Yes,
to try to do a Trump, and to
Yeah.
that's worked out so well for America. We'll see if we can replicate it in Brazil.
Right.
I'm afraid I have ideas cross my mind with both of them that are not politically correct. I'll just have to say that.
I've heard those ideas.
Of solution to the problem. I'm sorry Charlie Jacobs isn't around because he was willing to do it.
Some things shouldn't be spoken about.
That's right.
While we're on camera.
That's right. That's right. Be quiet.
And
Be,
the creation of martyrs doesn't advance society.
well, the martyrs are the guys who fail, right?
Well,
Maybe personally.
they may succeed in their beliefs.
Anyway, let me move on to another subject that maybe it's positive. We'll see. The idea of a technological fountain of youth has been a long desired goal, but for the most of the time, it has been more of an idea than anyone thought we could actually do anything about. But that has not stopped scientists from trying. And one of the stories of the last year is of a biotech startup, Altos Labs. Maybe you've heard of them. They are run by a guy, Rich Klausner, who's founder and chief scientist. And what they promise is medical rejuvenation via rejuvenation programming. And this is a way they have of resetting the DNA epigenome. And the epigenome is the DNA changes over your life and makes changes that affect how that genome affects all the rest of the organization. And so this is from the Altus Labs viewpoint, the way the genome is programmed to deal with your life over your age. And so there's a technique that they've used for, known about for perhaps a decade that can eliminate all of the epigenome changes and cause the cell to revert back to its original state. You would think that would reverse aging. The problem is that it means the cell also forgets everything that it did while it grew from being a baby cell to a grown-up cell. And it also can cause the cell to make unpredictable changes and causes cancer, at least some of the time. So it's not entirely a good solution, because if it doesn't cure you, it's going to kill you. And so Klausner says he has a technique that can roll back part of the changes, not roll it back all the way, roll back part of the changes. And he thinks this rolls back aging. And he says it's already proven to work in mice, and the reprogrammed mice, he's done things like cure them of diabetes and things like this. So it looks pretty hopeful. The problem, of course, is if you reprogram too much, you're going to get in trouble. And he says his partial reprogramming in mice has figured out how to circumvent the problems they talked about that might cause cancer and things like this. And his little reprogrammed rats live longer and healthier. And he says he rejuvenates the cell, but they don't lose their identity. And so it could be that this is going to be very promising. Some of the scientific problems are that there is no consensus in the scientific community about what causes aging in the first place, which makes the foundation that he is trying to build on kind of shaky. And some experts say it's a fascinating claim, but as to whether or not there will be any meaningful applications like a treatment against aging, only time will tell. But it's one of the things that you read about a lot in the anti-aging research, and maybe in a few years we'll know if it's actually applicable to human beings. I suspect even if it is applicable, I bet the treatments, he will try to get every penny he can. So if it works, I think it'll start out as a treatment for rich guys, and all the rest of us have to die. Oh, well. So are you guys ready to be reprogrammed?
I would have to see some results first.
Well, when you get old enough, there comes a time where you might be willing to just throw the dice.
Well, I'm 89. I'll be 90 before long.
I know. I hope I'm doing as well in another decade as you are now.
Yeah. But it's no fun. Lately, I have trouble sleeping. I don't know. Can't think anymore.
Okay. Now, come on there, Norman. You're a person who on some of these subjects are a leading edge kind of guy. You did it with your faith, so you're willing to do it with your epigenome. You're muted.
You're muted, Norman.
But I know what you had to say was clever.
I'd like more evidence first.
Okay, so you're
That's just what
not
I
you're
said.
not pushing the envelope enough. I'm actually to the point where I might be willing to take more chances than I used to be.
Um,
Okay. Well, thank you guys for joining me today, and I really appreciate your participation. And we'll see you next week. Adios.
Thanks, Richard.
amigos.
Thank you.